Okay, welcome back, loyal viewers, and you who arrived here by mistake while searching for how not to use all your film at once. Let's get into it. The idea was to shoot slower and bring intention to the process. Yes, actual intention. But before you start imagining a portfolio fit for a gallery, keep your expectations attached to the ground. This is real life. The Fujica GL690, my mechanical reminder that photography is not a race. With this beast, 8 frames per roll feels less like a limitation and more like a statement. Make every shot count. 8 frames, that's it. And so with limitation comes transformation. Suddenly every frame is a question. Is this worth it? There's this glorious practicality to medium format. It demands composition over impulse. Instead of reacting, you're forced to consider and compose. And you look at edges, background, layering, not just the subject, which usually leads to photographs that hold attention slightly longer, in my opinion. Packing 60 rolls of film for a 2-week trip is an act of optimism. What is over preparation after all, if not a form of hope? Of course, I only used 20, and therefore most of my films simply enjoyed a holiday inside of my backpack, comforting me like a security blanket designed by Kodak. I've had film emulsion for most lighting conditions, and despite grand plans and philosophical aspirations, most of my decisions amounted to shoving Portra 800 or Cinestill 400D, Kodak Golden HP5 pushed into the camera. Whatever. This trip didn't actually start in Thailand. It started in the Philippines, planned as a 2-week island-hopping family vacation and film photography trip mixed in. 2 weeks before the departure, a small cyclone began forming over the Philippines. With ferry routes being cancelled and the weather forecast looking increasingly grim, we decided to pivot our plans, and rather getting caught in storms, we booked flights from Manila straight to Thailand, intending to return to Manila after 10 days once the worst of the weather passed. We've survived nearly 20 hours sealed inside a sequence of flying metal tubes. Vienna to Doha, Doha to Manila, then Manila to Bangkok. I developed rare ability to recognize clouds from economy seat, capturing endless variations of wing, sky, and window with wing and sky. Airports are interesting photographically because they create those quiet moments. People waiting, some reflective surfaces, artificial light, all things that translate well to film. And unexpected changes are kind of disruption that often improves photography. When plans fall apart, you stop chasing expectations and start responding to what's actually in front of you, like more windows, whatever. This is technically where the trip starts visually. Although the first day was less creative and more recovering from 20 hours in transit, the plan was simple. Go to the beach, sit in the sun, and reintroduce the body to normal conditions. Beer. I still had few frames left on Ilford Pan 400 in Olympus XA2, so I figured I'd finish that roll before moving on. And after that I loaded Kodak Gold 200 into Voigtlander Bessa R, because colorful streets go well with color negative. Walking through the streets of Thailand, you'll notice the power lines everywhere. At some point I stopped trying to avoid them and just accepted that they were now part of the composition. In a few shots they are not just there, they are the main subject. So the floating market felt much more like 35mm. Slow but constant movement, boats going in every direction, people, color. This is where the Bessa R with 35mm Ultron got most of the work done. Slightly overcast as well, which helped. The light was softer and the Kodak Gold 200 handled it nicely. The colors came out the way I'd hope, without trying too hard. Composition wise, these are probably some of my favorite shots from the trip. After that we ended up at the beach where I shot a roll of Cinestill 400D. Results were inconsistent. Some frames look fine, others are dull, bordering on underexposed, which is odd because market shots earlier were exposed just fine. Could be me, could be the film, could be the light, it's hard to say. But so far, Cinestill 400D feels a bit unpredictable depending on conditions. Not unusable, just not entirely trustworthy either. On the way back from the beach, we hired one of those pickup trucks where you sit in the back. At some point the driver decided we were now in the qualifying lap and was doing what felt like well over 100 on the motorway, leaving everyone else behind. One of the more visually interesting places we visited was the Sanctuary of Truth. It's somewhere between a temple and a castle, blending Hindu and Buddhist symbolism. The entire structure is made of wood, no steel, no concrete, just large sections of carved timber, stacked into a huge, highly detailed building, which is impressive and slightly ambitious given the climate. Construction started in 1981 and is still ongoing. You can go inside, but you're given a hard hat on entry. Building is still very much a work in progress and possibly still figuring itself out. Photographically, it's dense, layers of carvings, repeating patterns, deep shadows everywhere. I brought the Voigtlander Bessa R loaded with Kodak Gold 200, which worked well outside. Inside though, ISO 200 was challenging. It was too dark without a tripod.
Over here. You see like a wood curve like this. If we look from the back side, like a balcony curve over there. So we use the technique to interlock the wood together without the nail. Okay, you want to try to put it there?
One of my favorite sequences from the strip was this medium format shot in the city center just before the sunset. I loaded Kodak Portra 800 film into my Fujica GL690, which is not exactly built for quick reactive shooting. It's big, slow, and every frame feels like a financial decision. But that's also the point, it forces you to slow down. I was walking around the different streets and in the space of about 20 to 30 minutes I ended up going through 4 rolls of Portra 800. I was mainly looking for scenes that have some structure, movement in the foreground, something stable in the background and the light connecting the two. I really like this shot. Colors, mood, it just works. The light at the time of the day helped. Low sun, long shadows, warm tones. Most shots were at around 1/25 of the second. At f8 to f11, the view dropped to 1/15 of a second to catch scooters moving through the frame, people crossing, small bits of motion layered into otherwise still scene. With 6:9 negative, the level of detail is ridiculous, like this photo. And some of these frames ended up being exactly what I was hoping for. Nothing dramatic, just everyday photos. I switched to Ilford HP5 when it got a little darker and shot it at ISO 1600 pushed to stops. Also worth noting, my GL690 has a small personality trait. It's a double stroke advance, but every 6 or 7 frames it decides it's done enough and only advances once, which means one frame per roll is partially sacrificed and overlaps with previous one, like here. When this happens, I'm ending up with 2 6x6 images when I can save them, and if not, instead of 8 frames I get 7, sometimes 6. It's just one of those things with old cameras. It does, however, make the whole process even more interesting. Out of 5 120mm rolls, which is 40 frames, I've got 11 keepers. Today was less about photography and more about sitting around pretending photography was happening. We spent most of the day at the cave in Pattaya, which is basically a beach bar designed for people who are tired from doing absolutely nothing. Sofa chairs everywhere, umbrellas, little wooden walkways through the sand, tall trees creating the kind of shade that makes you reconsider ever walking in the direct sunlight again. And surprisingly, the beach was almost empty, ideal conditions for shooting film very slowly. I brought Cinestill 400D and a roll of expired Ektachrome E100SW. Now Ektachrome was expired, although I had absolutely no idea about how much, so I rated it at ISO 64, loaded it into Olympus XA2 and hoped for the best. Which, to be fair, is what film photography is. People think of analog photography as if it's some deeply calculated technical process, but in most situations it is just standing in the sunlight thinking, yeah, maybe this works, and it does magically. Cinestill 400D handled the place exactly how you'd expect. That slightly cinematic glow that makes even beach furniture look significant. In fact, these photos are very similar to Ektachrome. I think Cinestill handled it well, a lot better to previous roll, which was very inconsistent. At one point, I photographed this palm tree against the sun, then I turned around and photographed it again with the sun behind me. And somehow it looked like two completely different places. That's one of the cool things about photography. You're not really photographing objects, you're photographing light. The palm tree itself did absolutely nothing. Very lazy subject overall. The light did all the work. And that was pretty much it for the day. No life-changing compositions. Tomorrow we're heading to Koh Lan Island to photograph a little marina town and wander around the island for the day, which means more film and more bad exposure decisions. The ferry took about 40 minutes, which is apparently the exact amount of time required to make everybody slightly sleepy. Most people spend the journey staring at the ocean. I mainly spent it trying to capture a few shots and some footage. Once we got to the island, we arrived at this little marina town with fishing boats, small shops, scooters everywhere, the usual organized chaos. I shot most of the day on Kodak Gold 200, which feels like a good decision for places that are warm, slightly faded and moving at half speed. Kodak Gold has this way of making ordinary scenes look like memories from 10 years ago. From the port, we climbed into one of those pickup trucks with benches in the back to head over to Nual Beach. Nual Beach itself was very simple. There wasn't much there apart from food, beer, sun, and the general feeling that nobody had any urgent plans, so we mostly sat in the shade doing very little, and that felt like the correct approach. I think travel photography sometimes gets trapped in this idea that you constantly need to be searching for the next image, but sometimes the best part of traveling is just sitting somewhere unfamiliar long enough for it to feel normal. Also, it was extremely hot, which naturally encourages philosophical thinking, beer and reduced movement. Oh my god, so hot. Later on we headed back into town and wandered around for a bit. I took photos here and there without really forcing it. Scooters passing by, busy little streets, boats sitting in the harbor, nothing dramatic. But honestly, Kodak Gold is very forgiving of unremarkable decisions, and some of the photos turned out surprisingly nice, which is one of the better parts of film photography. Sometimes you barely remember taking the frame, and then weeks later it becomes your favorite image from the trip. By the end of the day, I was slightly sunburned, carrying too much camera gear, and had somehow taken few rolls of photos while doing almost nothing, but overall a successful day. The day before we flew back, I took my Bessa R loaded with Cinestill 400D out for one last evening walk around the city, partly to catch a few final frames in the last light, and partly to justify dragging this much camera gear on holiday in the first place. Here are some frames from this walk. To conclude it, overall, a successful trip. Thank you for watching, and even bigger thank you to the small but statistically concerning number of people subscribed to this channel for willingly sitting through 30 minutes of film photography chaos. Thank you!